Hi, and welcome to the second installment of the Autopilot movie series for the IXEG 737-300. Today I'd like to talk about the regular basic autopilot modes, how to engage and disengage. You might know that the 737 has two autopilots, A and B. They can't be on at the same time unless you do a dual channel approach, and they can only control pitch and roll, no rudder, hence no automatic rollout after landing. They are getting controlled by the mode control panel that you can see here on top of the dashboard, and there's the two autopilot systems A and B in command and control wheel steering. You also have the two flight director buttons, various buttons and knobs to control the flight parameters. Let's look at the EADI for a second. On the top is the 4 columns of the flight mode enunciation. That's what the autopilot is actually doing. That's where you want to look if you want to know what your autopilot is doing. Don't look at the MCP, look right here. It will show you what the state of auto throttle, pitch, roll and command mode actually is. Now let's start with putting Autopilot A in command. You can see command is in green, control wheel steering, pitch and roll in amber, or actually yellow. And if I switch to B, A goes off because only one can be on at the same time. This is the control wheel steering mode, no command in green. And what this does is, right now the control steering pitch and roll mode will maintain pitch and roll as set. You can bank and pitch the aircraft with a yoke. As soon as you let go, the autopilot will actually maintain that bank and that pitch. Pretty convenient. Stabilizes the aircraft, and you can go to certain limits, and if you overbank like I do now and you let go afterwards, it goes back to that limit, in this case 30 degrees off bank. And the special thing about the control wheel steering mode that I'm in now, not the command mode but the regular CWS mode, is that it will not take any commands off the autopilot, of the mode control panel. I can push all the buttons, heading select, altitude hold, whatever. It will not react to that. It's just a very basic mode, and it will also violate the #1 rule of the auto flight system. It should always capture the 11,000 feet now, never go through that MCP altitude, but in this basic mode it will, as you can see here, blissfully go right through it. I pitch the aircraft up with a yoke, go into the command mode, and just to demonstrate what happens as I come up on the 11,000 feet now, the autopilot will not fly through this selected altitude. It will level off, go into altitude hold. Next up is the heading select mode. You can see I turn the heading knob. The little heading bug turns on the EHSI. The plane doesn't turn yet because I'm still in the control wheel steering roll mode. As I engage that heading select mode, you can see the airplane starts banking, and we have a bank limit selector. Turn that to 15 degrees, and you can see the autopilot will limit the bank to 15 degrees. We usually have it at 25. That's pretty convenient for passenger comfort, and that's what we like to keep it on. Next up, if I deselect the heading select, you can see it reverts back to control wheel steering roll. That's the way of the autopilot to say, I don't know what to do with the roll mode, I'll just go to control wheel steering. It would happen the same in the pitch axis. And if I change the altitude here to 10,000, you can see the altitude hold button lights up. That means you can deselect that mode, or it can revert to another mode. That's what a lit button really means. You can deselect it. Let's see what happens if I push the vertical speed here. I can deselect it. Autopilot reverts to control wheel steering pitch. So as I said before, look at the flight mode enunciation. Don't look at the lit buttons. Mode might be active, but the button might not be lit, and that's to avoid any confusion. Now let's see what happens. I dialed in 10,000 feet again. I'm in vertical speed mode, descending towards that 10,000 feet, and you can see the very left hand side column of the flight mode enunciation is blank. That means manual control of the thrust levers. I had to pull them back a little bit that I do not gain too much airspeed in the dive. If I switch to channel B, nothing really changes, and It looked like that caused the altitude required to come up, but that was just pure coincidence. It would have happened on channel A just as well, because there's only one altitude selection window, only one heading select window. A or B doesn't matter, unless, of course, you have different altimeter subsetting on the altimeter, or if you try to capture different VOR radial. We'll get to that later. Next one is the flight level change mode, and I will engage the auto throttle. You might remember from the previous movie that engaging it will automatically engage mode control panel's speed as a safety function, and the auto throttle will maintain the current airspeed. Now, watch what happens when I click the flight level change button here. The flight level is, or the altitude is set to 12,000. I'm at 10,000. The autopilot knows, okay, we want to climb. I put the auto throttle into N1 mode, and I pitch the aircraft to maintain the select speed. It's 280 knots right now. Initial surge of power put me a little over that, so the airplane is really pitching up to get back to 280 knots, and result is a very high climb rate, and you will see that the autopilot captures the altitude in time to avoid a very rough level off. It goes into the altitude acquire mode. The auto throttle reverts back to MCP speed to maintain the current airspeed, and the autopilot will level off at the 12,000 feet gently, and then go into altitude hold as it reaches that 12,000 feet. Now let's turn away from those mountains here a little bit. They make me nervous, heading towards the north away from the Alps, and you can see airplane turns nicely. What I did now is I moved the 12,000 feet away to 9,900, put that to 10,000 in a second, before I actually was at that altitude, and that of course disrupted the level off process. The autopilot reverted to vertical speed. I push the altitude hold button. That's something we don't really use a lot, the altitude hold, because it will level off at exact the altitude that you were at. You can see it's not at the 12,000, it goes back a little below that, and that's only convenient if you want to maintain a very odd altitude like 9,322 feet, but in real flying you rarely do that. Okay, this is the flight level change mode in the descent. You can see the auto throttle triggers in retard, pulls back the thrust levers until they run against the stop, either the mechanical stop, you can actually hold them with your hands in the real airplane, then it will go back to arm when it feels that the thrust levers don't move anymore for a certain while. I increased the speed just to demonstrate the pitching, and you can see the airplane pitches down to go to the 321 knots, of course, coming up on the 10,000 feet. Altitude acquire comes active again, and MCP speed to level off at the 10,000 feet. Next thing I want to show you is capturing a VOR radial. You can see on the RMI at the center of the picture I have set VOR1 to VOR that's to the left in front of us, about 30 something miles, and if you look at the EHSI, it's in the basic mode, and as I turn the course selector you can see there's the radial that I want to capture. So what I do is I arm the VOR lock mode. You can see the roll channel is currently blank in control with steering roll, and in white you can see armed VOR lock. Now we just have to wait until the radial runs towards the center for the autopilot to capture it. I increase the speed a little bit so we don't have to wait that long, and well, as you see, nothing happens. What's wrong? The autopilot should turn to intercept that radial. Well, this is one of the traps that you could really fall in if you don't pay attention. Look at the autopilot system. B is engaged. B does not know or care about VOR1, and as I switch the channel back to A, it actually realizes, oops, there's the radial, I want to turn to re-intercept it, and I speed up time a little bit here again to show you how it turns and re-intercepts the radial to capture it and follow it inbound. This is useful for VOR navigation, of course also VOR approaches. It will also work with the localizer. Last thing, of course, how do I turn the freaking thing off again if I don't want it? I just move the yoke. It will revert to control steering roll or pitch. Another option is, of course, to move or just push the button again. Don't forget to cancel the warning afterwards to move the disengage bar, and there's also an instinctive disconnect button on the yoke that you can map to the joystick.